Hello everyone, another global patch has come. This time there's a ton of content they're adding. Probably because it looks like they're squishing together content that was meant to be spread out over 2 months into just this month, which means we might not see a whole lot of content next month. But whatever the case, let's just revisit some of this stuff. So let's just start by talking about these new characters. We got Autokrato and Lucretia. So let's start with Autokrato here. Now, Autokrato gets a pretty bad rap among the community. A lot of people say he's not very good, and he's certainly not some ultra OP character that you have to pull for that we get a lot of the time. But I don't think Autokrato is really bad. He's more just a niche character. I think he's going to be one of those characters that a handful of players really enjoy using, and you guys see him once in a while. The most obvious character to compare him to is Bernhardt. But Bernhardt is usually a lot more useful than Autokrato for the simple fact that Bernhardt can faction buff people. If Autokrato could faction buff, maybe this would be a different story. But even starting with his talent, you can already see some of the things he pales in comparison to Bernhardt. So he has a stat bonus when engaging in single target combat. This is similar to how Bernhardt only deals more damage in battle as well. But the difference is that Bernhardt's is a damage mod, whereas Autokrato's is a stat mod. In PvP especially, a lot of times damage mods are better, although the fact that Autokrato also gets defensive stats from this part of his talent means that he is usually bulkier than Bernhardt would be. But anyway, one of the other problems with this is just the fact that Bernhardt is really good at doing single target damage. Bernhardt's normal attack alone can be very strong. Autokrato's focus really isn't on single target damage. He's more of like a disruptor and somewhat of an AoE character. So having his talent only boost his single target damage is already kind of a problem to begin with, and you're going to notice this a lot about Autokrato. He just has a kit and skill set that feels kind of awkward, but all that really means is that he's not as straightforward to use as Bernhardt is, because with Bernhardt it's really just you faction buff and then he can hit people really hard or he can sword dance people really hard. Autokrato shares the general bulkiness and a couple qualities with Bernhardt, but his playstyle is actually very different. So the second part of Autokrato's talent is again very similar to Bernhardt. Just like Bernhardt, he has an aura, and this is indeed a debuff aura, so it does disable things like Redeemers, or at least it should. So instead of reducing attack and defense, it reduces the damage dealt by enemies based on the number of blocks they run. So obviously just by parking Autokrato next to somebody, you can reduce the amount of damage they take, just like how Bernhardt reduces the attack of an incoming attack. Autokrato reduces the damage, although Autokrato's aura is obviously more designed to be anti-rush, since the goal here is to punish long-range strikers. And of course, if you're so inclined, I guess you could stack both Bernhardt and Autokrato's aura and make them do a bit less damage, but I don't think anybody has ever really done that. So Autokrato's aura works pretty closely with the skill set that he has. If you'll notice, a lot of his skills involve moving enemies around or limiting their movement in some way, which means that after Autokrato attacks or does one of his skills, he can force the enemy into a position where they have to move to attack, or perhaps punish them for not moving. So basically all this is to force them to not only move their units into unfavorable positions, but also, obviously, if you activate Autokrato's aura, you're not going to do as much damage. So because of this, Autokrato's 1C and his 3C are usually pretty locked in as far as his skill loadout goes. He has a 1C that says if he damages opponents, then he'll inflict a debuff that makes them take fixed damage if they don't move on their turn, but they take less damage from it the more they move. So obviously the idea here is to force your opponent to either not move, and they'll take a bunch of fixed damage, or they'll have to move a lot, in which case they'll do less damage to Autokrato and anybody around him. This is immunizable, so just like with any other fixed damage character, this can be mitigated somewhat, although you could always say the same thing about Rupture from Bernhardt, so in some ways this is still kind of similar to what Bernhardt does. So you often combine this with his 3C, which is a big AoE. It's 6x3 lines. It shuffles around the people that you hit, and it also forces them to only be able to move in straight lines. Now this can obviously be kind of tricky to use, because forcing people into only being able to walk in straight lines has its usefulness vary depending on what kind of map you're on. Like, obviously, if you hit a bunch of calves and you're on a map with a bunch of forests or mountains or water, then that's bad news for the calves. So since we're talking about the 3C, I guess one thing to note about it is that the shuffle portion of it is more similar to a Rainforest AoE than it is to Leon's AoE. And what I mean by that is that it shuffles enemy units within their positions. It doesn't just send people all over the place like Leon's 3C can. This can sometimes be a good thing depending on how you want to randomize your opponent's positions. But obviously the disruption potential is a little bit less than something like Leon's 3C where they just get blown all over the place. So anyway, since Autokrato's 1C and 3C are often pretty locked in, most of his flexibility in his loadout is going to be coming from his 2C choice. And he does have quite a few choices as far as this goes. First he got Sword Dance as an AoE choice. Since his fixed damage isn't like Rupture, it's a debuff where your opponent has to end their turn before they get hit by it. And you're not allowed to stack it or anything like that, so this can be sort of redundant with his 3C in the sense that you can't put a bunch of fixed damage stacks on your opponent or anything like that. But Sword Dance is always nice because not only is it a decently strong AoE, but obviously it also does heal block, so it's always going to be nice if you need it. And similar to Bernhardt, he has Hegemony, Strong Arm, and Shield Dash. I want to say these have their place to some degree, but like I said before, Autokrato doesn't do that much single target damage, so Hegemony and Shield Dash aren't as useful on him as it is with Bernhardt, aside from the fact that Bernhardt's 3C powers those up anyway. Strong Arm can be kind of useful because he is decently tanky, but again, since Bernhardt has his 3C, which gives him physical damage reduction with Strong Arm, Autokrato might still pale in comparison to Bernhardt as far as just tanking goes. So the final two choices for his 2C are two of the unique skills he has. They're both single target attacks, which again, isn't a huge thing you would do with Autokrato, but the main reason you would use these is because they have a disruption effect of some kind. One of them teleports the enemy back 3 spaces, and the other one steals 3 buffs and then pushes them back 3 blocks. Once again, both of these are obviously meant to play into Autokrato's ability to disrupt the enemy team. But the most unique one is still this Exile skill that teleports the enemy back, because since it is a teleport effect, this means it works on teams with Hilda in it. Now for this to work, the attack cannot be guarded, so if you're facing off against Hilda, you pretty much can only use it against Hilda most of the time. But I think its uses are fairly obvious. So to summarize Autokrato a bit, again, he's not that great at single target damage, he's not the best at AoE damage either. I mean, he's got a bit of both and he'll do okay damage. But the main thing you want him for is his team disruption abilities. I think for certain players they're going to find a lot of value in that, but it is a very niche role, which is why he wasn't super popular. He isn't as obviously useful in the majority of situations, unlike our next character, who is Lucretia. I don't think I have a ton to say about Lucretia anymore. I think a lot of people are intimately familiar with what she's capable of at this point. She is both a single target and AoE mage. The entirety of her kit is just attack spells pretty much, although she does have mass attack for a bit of team support on that end. But I think I'll just limit myself to mostly talking about Lucretia's most unique aspect, which is her summon. So she summons a golem at the start of every map. So not only does this summon give her a revive, but it also has 3 very useful skills on it. First, it gives Lucretia +2 range, so she just has 4 range attack all the time. It also increases the range of her AoEs, so that means she can shoot Black Hole from 5 spaces away. It has a skill that reduces the cooldown of a target by 1 turn, and this is a targeted skill, so you can use it on somebody that's not Lucretia. And finally, it can swap positions with Lucretia and then act again. Mostly this is used for Lucretia to run forward, attack, and then the puppet can switch positions with Lucretia to get her back into safety, and then the puppet can just run back to safety as well. Now this puppet technically does have a guard pierce ability. If you give Lucretia the 1C she has, where if she does damage she will deal a debuff that causes the puppet to be able to pierce guard. You can do something like Lucretia casts an AoE and then the puppet runs forward after transposing with Lucretia to guard pierce and finish someone off. That is still an option, but most people don't do that. They stick to Lucretia just being a very dangerous long-range mage, while the puppet not only provides Lucretia with a revive, but also provides a decent amount of support by reducing cooldowns of skills. Like I said before, Lucretia is overall a pretty straightforward character. Her talent goes up to plus 30% damage at 6 stars, so she does about as much damage as you might expect from all the best mages in the game. And of course it applies to both single target and AoE, so Lucretia is just very flexible as a DPS and provides some valuable support while doing it. And on top of all this, she just has 3 very, very good factions for the current meta. Tensei faction, which of course is probably one of the most overpowered factions right now. Empire faction, which is pretty popular because of Bernhardt's resurgence. as well as Rosenseal being able to buff Empire. And while Princess isn't super popular at this very moment, they are going to get some buffs in the future, and Christiane is going to come along. So as far as the DPS goes, Lucretia has just about everything you could ask for. And even for PvE-focused players, she can still be very good because she is as good at damage as Lana is, but she just has all this other stuff on top of that. She is, however, kind of inconvenient for newer players because you need Licorice and Autokrato to unlock both their bonds, and obviously these are both characters that don't get run super often. Obviously you can get Autokrato on this banner right here, but I do think for newer players they're going to be focusing on getting a lot of other units as opposed to just powering up this one mage. I guess the last thing to really talk about with Lucretia is her 3C. So not only does this have a passive that restores HP to herself and her puppet anytime she ends her turn, so basically it has reinforcements folded into it as a passive. But the single target attack here is one of the best magic attacks in the game. It does 1.6 times damage, which is decent enough. It's effective against holy units, so it's pretty good against two of the popular magic tanks in the game right now, which are Layden and Freya. And finally, it lowers pretty much every stat by 30%, which is much stronger than the majority of debuffs you can typically get. Now, of course, tanks with Overlord badge can avoid this stat debuff, but that just opens them up to getting hit by the other debuffs that Lucretia can have access to, or maybe her teammate has access to, like heal block. But yeah, overall, Lucretia, like I said, pretty straightforward. Good single target damage, good AoE damage, some good support on the side. If you're big into the PvP meta for this game, you probably don't need me to tell you, you're probably already pulling for her. But yeah, if you need a strong mage for your team still, definitely check her out. So let's talk a bit about these 3Cs. Akka's 3C, obviously this is meant to increase her rushing ability by giving her a very useful single target attack. It wasn't uncommon for Akka to run an attack skill before this. Obviously she would be using either Javelin or Dark Scythe. The problem that Akka always ran into is that Dark Scythe is obviously the better skill of the two, but using Dark Scythe forced her to use ranged soldiers like spiders. So if she wanted to take full advantage of her really powerful melee soldiers like werewolves, bone dinos, or even the occasional scorpion, she had to bring Javelin because that's the only way they would attack with her. Dark Scythe also had the problem of being a ranged attack, so it gets punished in melee, so you cannot use it in close range in case you really needed to. Like for example, you're fighting an enemy mage or trying to hit Landius or something. So this 3C doesn't have any of those problems. It will adapt to whatever attack stat that Akka has that's higher. It ignores both defense and magic defense, albeit not as much as Dark Scythe, so it might be slightly weaker than Dark Scythe in that regard. But even on top of just being a very convenient attack skill for her, it also drops a totem for her that debuffs the enemies. So again, this also helps bolster Akka's Rush Enabler role. After she's done boosting your team's movement, you can run her in, drop this totem, and lower your opponent's stats, which of course can make it easier for the rest of your rush to be successful. Obviously, by using this skill, you are skipping out on using another support skill for Akka, like her Act Again or something, but still a very nice tool to have in Akka's kit, I think. It's just not something particularly revolutionary. Akka's still going to be doing the same role she always has. So next we have Grenier's 3C. So in a vacuum, this is actually a pretty decent 3C. It's got Null Guard, it gives Grenier Power Stab, so he doesn't have to bring Power Stab to up his attack anymore. And it even drops a terrain effect that puts Grenier onto a fort. So obviously all these things make Grenier better at tanking, but the problem with Grenier is still everything else about him. He has no inbuilt damage reduction, his magic defense is pitiful, his tanking soldiers are okay. I mean, you can make up for the fact that he is kind of bad at tanking magic by switching over to Archer and using Bolt Rangers or something. But really, anything you do with Grenier, I feel like, is just a band-aid over the fact that he's just not that good of a unit. Even with this 3C being pretty decent, I just feel like Grenier has too many problems to be solved by a single skill. Really, I think the solution here would be to give Grenier an SP class of some kind. But, you know, we can only hope. I think out as a starter trio, he is probably the one that's been kind of neglected and screwed over the most. So I really hope the dev team throws him a bone eventually. But until then, this 3C is, like, it's nice for beginners, I guess. But the thing is, like, if you're at the point where you can already get 3C materials, I don't think you're going to be investing super hard into Grenier or anything at that point. But, you know, for a newer account, he is a free 6-star unit, and he's perfectly serviceable for a lot of PvE content, so I think as far as that goes, this is still pretty useful. Other than that, I'd leave it alone. Pirotess's 3C is okay. It chips Pirotess before battle so that she will actually have her talent active. It pierces guard, it attacks at 3 range. And then it heals Pirotess after battle so that she can get her last rights back up or whatever. I want to say that this is exactly what she needed, but at the same time, I've said it before, Pirotess always should have had a skill like this, and the fact that she had to wait until her 3C to get one like it is pretty crappy of the devs. Even with the skills, she's still a pretty generic assassin, I feel like. I don't see a ton that she offers over someone like, say, Silver Wolf. She does have attack boost in her talent, and this does give damage boosts from this 3C's passive. But Pirotess's base attack is actually kind of low compared to some of her peers, and that might kind of limit the usefulness of her talents. But yeah, aside from all that, I really just don't have a whole lot to say here. Pirotess's 3C is not bad or anything, but it does feel kind of lazy on the part of developers. So, okay, here we got the exclusive, Landius and Licorice. So Landius' weapon isn't bad, but it's just not that good either. I think my biggest problem with it is just that they didn't seem to understand the existing weapon choices for Landius when they designed this. On the offensive side, this weapon obviously is not very good. It obviously isn't going to be as good as Ragnarok, and it pales even in comparison to like Peacemaker or even Throne Guardian, because it is a lance, so it has pretty low base attack. And of course, for Cav Landius, if you use something like Seal Guardian or even Dragon Slayer, you're probably still going to get more attack than this thing gives. Whereas when you compare it to Landius' more defensive weapon, it also kind of pales in comparison sometimes. This exclusive gives 10% attack as the stat percent bonus. When you compare this to Throne Guardian, which has 5% HP, alongside the 10% attack, or Dragon Slayer, which has 8% HP and attack, even with the extra flat HP from it being a lance, it just makes it look like the exclusive didn't know what it was trying to be, whether it was trying to be an offensive weapon or a defensive weapon. Now, the ability on it obviously suggests that this is meant to be a more defensive weapon, since it does give damage reduction to Landius even more against ranged attacks. I should note that this does not activate against melee attacks, it counts the blocks between Landius and the opponent, so in order to max out this 15% damage reduction, you actually need to be 4 spaces away from your opponent. Now, this can be useful since there's a decent number of long-range mages in the meta now, and this 15% damage reduction does in fact apply to both Landius himself and his soldiers, so it can be very good. If you stack enough damage reduction, this is obviously a huge contributor to that. But when you compare it to something like Dragon Slayer, Graham, or even Throne Guardian, as far as defensive choices go, you're probably not really getting that much defensive value out of it compared to the HP you got from those weapons. Except again for situations where you know you're going to be having the opportunity to stack a lot of damage reduction somehow. Now if you like Stealing Chant on Landius, that might be a very good start to combine with this for just even more damage reduction. But overall I'm just very underwhelmed by this weapon. Again, it's not like it's terrible or anything, it's just one of those things where if you already have a well-enchanted weapon for Landius, there's really not much reason to be working on this thing. But on the opposite side of the competence spectrum, we have Licorice's exclusive, which is incredibly good. This is arguably one of the best exclusives they've ever added to the game. It makes Licorice not only very good at keeping faction buff up for any of your Dark Faction characters, but it also means that Licorice can cast Mass Heal every single turn, which turns her into a legit healer for a lot of players. You can cast Mass Heal every turn, you get the healing terrain plus the fact that she casts Mass Heal. If you combine this with an upcoming staff that will also let you remove debuffs, it just makes Liko very good for AoE healing situations. Of course, this thing is competing with Tenyo's Headdress, so you are going to lose out on that, but this is one of the few helms they've designed where it actually is OP enough that you should seriously drop Tenyo's Headdress for this thing. It's actually not even a case of, hey, maybe sometimes you could see this thing being better than Tenyo's. This is actually just better than Tenyo's for Licorice, I think. So yeah, Licorice players, if you have the controllers, pick this up as soon as you can. Okay, so SB Cherie. So I was definitely off the mark when I first talked about SB Cherie because she has grown to become one of the most popular characters on the Chinese server. There's a couple reasons for this. For one thing, there's a decent amount of feral units in the game right now, so that makes Cherie's Shadow Raid a lot more valuable because she can kill a lot of these units without even having her troops participate with her. Although, of course, she can also still use goblins to make sure she gets that kill if she needs to. She can activate her Act Again pretty consistently now. You just need to do some positioning shenanigans, which is very nice if people decide to go tankless. Cherie has always been good at killing tankless teams, and she is even better at that now since she has so much more attack, and she can activate her Act Again even without killing anything. She is decently bulky, even on her magic side, because she has angels out front. And which is very nice in the meta because again, there's lots of very frail mages running around. And her factions work fine enough for the moment because Glory does have Elwyn to buff them. Zerida can still be used once in a while, so meteor buff for that. And Princess is going to get a bit of a buff when Christiane comes out. So Cherie kind of falls into that really nice position where she has a bit of everything going for her. She's got high attack, but no damage boost, so she's not great at killing tanks or super bulky units. But that's okay because she can act again very often. She's pretty tanky against single target attacks, including the multitude of magic attacks that come her way. She's got decent movement with her new 1C, but not like crazy movement like some units have. She can ignore terrain while moving, which is always nice. By the way, she does not have unicorns always active thanks to her talent. Her talent only applies to moving. This is a mistake I've made in the past because the wording on it is so confusing. But the short of it is that if you want to get bonus damage from her unicorns, you still need to stand on grasslands and stuff. Although she will be using angels the majority of the time, so you don't need to think about that too much. Cherie's also capable of equipping just about any equipment you can think of. She can still wear her leather stuff that you are using on her Dragon Master class. And being that she's a holy class, she can also wear mage armor, which is very useful, especially because you can either put Tenyo's headdress on her for some more RNG goodness, or you can put the Glory of the World helm on her, which combines very, very nicely with Last Rites. She can still use whatever axe you had on her, which is likely Ragnarok. She can also use swords if you really want her to. Like I said, Cherie's just kind of an interesting balanced, bulky DPS unit who has a guard pierce option. Has a bit of everything, so that's why she fits into a lot of boxes right now, and she just responds very well to the meta as it exists currently. Anyway, Cherie is a character that I think pretty much everyone should have. If you think you can spare the materials, then SP Cherie I think is worth getting. If nothing else, this also makes her very good in PvE. Not that she was bad, she was always pretty decent in PvE, but now she can, for example, consistently attack twice against Jormungandr, or just being able to hit twice on a lot of the challenge fights or boss fights you might face in this game. Alright, let's finish this off by talking a little bit about the content they added. First off, we have the second run of Dimensional Expedition. I already talked about this a little bit in our video, so I won't go too much into it here. So we have the 4th Forbidden Battleground running right now. There's some different feats this time, like you have to clear some of the stages below a certain amount of total power on your team. As usual, I'll be trying to do these maps with some minimalist teams if I can, so look forward to that when that comes. So finally, they added both a bunch of new main story chapters and they added a new time rift. So there's a couple notable treasures to be gained from these new additions. So in the new time rift 19, in stage 19-4, you will be able to find a Scepter of Divinity. The new main story chapters, on the other hand, give a Bloodline magic armor along the way. I mean, I think a lot of endgame players don't really need more Bloodline magic armors at this point. But if you really needed one, I guess that's still nice. I'm pretty behind on the main story chapters myself. I'll probably give off my butt and start doing them soon, because this is the final story chapters of Act 2, as far as I know. Although there are a couple epilogue chapters that come afterwards. But anyway, when I get around to doing them, I'll be sure to post those as well. I guess one last thing to mention is that there are some quality of life changes. You can combine hammers now, and you can now click through the story dialogue and actually see the entire line before you skip a line, which I'm surprised it took them this long to add the feature, but hey, better late than never, I guess. And that's all I got for now. So even as I'm talking right now, the 3.0 patch has dropped on the Chinese server. I am going to be playing around with it a little bit to see what they added, and once I'm done with that, I'll be sure to talk about it a bit. Anyway, good luck on your polls, guys. I hope you guys get Lucretia, and I guess one copy of Autokrato so you can get the bond as well. I personally am skipping this banner because Lucretia is not my playstyle, so I guess wish me luck whenever Apex Arena opens again, because not having Lucretia is going to be pretty painful for Season 8. Whatever case, there's a lot added to the game this month, so there's going to be a lot to talk about, so I'll see you guys very soon.